since it's a number of people online that I don't know, so I expect they probably don't know who I am. So I'm going to just give a brief bio about how did I get to the point of making this presentation tonight. I guess I've always been interested in bugs. It goes back to a 10-year-old kid that had a creek flowing through a northern Minnesota farm a number of years ago, and I was amazed by sticks that moved upstream and little wiggly things in the water. And I didn't realize until graduate school a number of years later that those were caddisflies and mayflies. So when I was in graduate school, I was interested in a research program, and my research was focused on assessing the impact of a nuclear power plant's thermal discharge on the macroinvertebrates of the Mississippi River in central Minnesota. So that's where I first got introduced to bugs, aquatic insects, whatever you want to call them. And then I went to work for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources doing an environmental impact assessment in the northeastern region of Minnesota, adjacent to the boundary waters. And I studied the macroinvertebrates of that area for a couple of years. Following there, I came over to Wisconsin to work for the pulp and paper industry as an aquatic ecologist, assessing the impact of that industry on the receiving waters of the US. So I worked on rivers from Maine to Montana, down south to Louisiana, and over east to Florida, many rivers in between. During that time period, I had the opportunity to write a number of technical papers and publish them in entomological journals. And that life was pleasant and continued to about the early 1980s when we had a recession and dollars then vanished for environmental impact work, or they're greatly cut back, and it was time to change careers. And I went to work for Kimberly-Clark Corporation for 30 years. So that took me away from streams. But in working for Kimberly-Clark, I primarily focused on product development. I was a research manager for the R&D department. Also worked in the global group for the last 15 years, and I worked in 25 different countries around the world. And you can imagine that working for a major Fortune 100 corporation is rather stressful. Well, a buddy of mine that I got to know through Boy Scouting, Tony Tremmel, he's one of our Fox Valley TU alumni who's no longer with us. He's fishing different streams now. But he introduced me to fly fishing and Trout Unlimited. And I've been a member of Trout Unlimited for, I'm on my 32nd year. I learned that trout streams in Wisconsin do a lot for the soul. And that's where I was able to manage the stresses from working for 30 years in a business environment I had no idea that I'd end up functioning in. So I stayed involved with bugs through fishing and Trout Unlimited, and that's where we got to today. So today what I'm going to be sharing with you are some content that I've pulled together mainly over the last 7 years. All of the photographs and the video are my own. In a few places, I've taken pictures of figures from various publications, and I provide the citation that gives credit to the sources. So tonight, I'm going to talk about Grannom, or as we say in Wisconsin, black caddis. And one of the main themes is that if we get to know Grannom better, maybe we can end up fishing a little bit better. Okay, this is the agenda. I'm going to talk a little bit about our common names, what we call things. I'm going to focus a little on the importance of Grannom to fly fishing, where you can find Grannom, where you can find these caddisflies. And then we're going to focus on learning more about Grannom by focusing on life cycles and behaviors. And then I'll touch on the flies to catch trout when Grannom are out and about. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about the beauty of connectedness. And that'll become evident as we move along here. The common name. First of all, anybody can create a common name for any bugs. The scientists do that all the time with Latin words, so if they can do it, well, so can we. But the original name, Grannom, came out of the UK in about 1836. An author by the name of Alfred Ronalds wrote a book. It was the first description of the brachycentrus caddis flies in the UK, and he called them Grannom, and that word referred to the green tail characteristic of all life stages of Grannom. Every life stage from egg to adult and pupa, they're all the same color green. And that's what Grannom kind of refers to. So in the term Grannom came to the US along with the fly fishing culture. So that was a natural transition. And in the US, Grannom is the most, or it's sometimes just called the American Grannom. That's the most common term across the US. And there are some regional exceptions, and Wisconsin certainly is one of them. In Wisconsin and in some of the western areas, black caddis is the term used for brachycentrus. Brachycentrus is the Latin or the scientific name for this particular genus of caddis fly. There's also some other common names in Montana, Wyoming, and perhaps other regions of the West. The mother day caddis is another term, and that refers to the time of the year that that particular species is on the wing. And some authors of popular fly fishing culture also use the brachycentrus name. Central area of Wisconsin, all of us are pretty well familiar with Ross Mueller's books on fly fishing, and he uses all three names. He uses black caddis and brachycentrus. So again, the common name is going to be, it'll vary across the country. And it's important to kind of understand what the common name is referring to. So if in Wisconsin we say black caddis, well, it can be several caddis. And what I'm sharing in this series of pictures is for brachycentrus, and I'm comparing it to chimera. Chimera is also a black colored caddis fly, and these pictures are taken from the South Fork of the Bad Axe down in Vernon County. That's where the chimera pictures come from. And you'll notice how jet black that caddis fly is. It's the same size as the brachycentrus above. And you'll notice the brachycentrus is sort of a tan and sometimes a charcoal color as an adult. As a larva, the brachycentrus has a dark head, dark colored legs, and sort of a chartreuse green abdomen. The chimera has an amber colored head and legs and a sort of a beige lemon colored abdomen. The cases are also different for both of these caddis flies. The typical Granum case is above. You see it's cylindrical in shape, tapers down to an end. Chimera, it makes a silken case. It's primarily a long silk stocking, and you'll see the inserted picture there. It's used to filter feed very finely divided organic particles from the water. And the shuck is the last comparison, and we'll see in this presentation Granum swim up to the center part of a stream and emerge to the adult stage at the stream surface. Chimera don't. They crawl from the bottom of the stream, either up in vegetation that's emergent, or stump or rocks, or up the riverbank. If you happen to be fishing a jet black colored caddis in Wisconsin, you're probably not fishing brachycentrus. In fact, there are several other black caddis flies in Wisconsin. The black dancer is one of them. And also there's one called the tiny black horn sedge. and the tiny black granum, which is a microsema. It's okay to use any of these common names. And if you were to look at the sporting literature, that the common names can apply to a range of insects, but sometimes the sporting literature also refers to the Latin name, and that can help point you in a specific direction. But again, there are many common names that could be used. Now I'm going to talk about the importance of granum to fly fishing. And I'll be using the term granum throughout the rest of this presentation. It's a term I'm familiar with, and I like the fact that it represents the coloration of all life forms of this particular Brachycentrus. So the Granum hatch is in April, is the first major dry fly hatch in Wisconsin. And in fact, there are two hatches. There's an April hatch and a September hatch. And it's present in almost all streams in the state, and it's widely distributed across the state. And we'll get into some examples of that in a minute. This is the standard Wisconsin hatch chart that I put together. Down the left-hand side are the common names of bugs. Across the top, you see the different months of the year. The X's represent when the adult form of the insect is going to be present on the surface of streams in Wisconsin. And the highlighted area, the darker color that you see along here, that represents the peak emergence time period. So for Granum, we have a circle around the April and into early May hatch. And then there's a second hatch that occurs in the latter part of September. So there's two times of the year that this hatch can be fished when the adults are present on the surface. And I'm going to be talking a lot about making reference to the life cycle. So I'm just, and I know a lot of you know this, but I'm going to just briefly go over it. And this is from Dave Whitlock's book, excellent book on aquatic food items for fish. The larvae start out on the bottom of the stream, and inside the larval case, the insect transforms into a pupa. The pupa swims to the surface, and if there's any entomologists in this audience, they also use the word ferrate adult. That's the technical term for the swim-up version of the pupa. So the pupa, or the ferrate adult, hits the surface, immediately transitions out of the shuck. As an adult, the adults flit off to the stream banks and streamside vegetation until they mature. And that can be a day or a couple days. And then on the stream banks or on obstacles, logs along the stream banks, they mate. And then after mating has occurred, the mature female can either lay eggs on the surface or swim down to the bottom of the stream and lay eggs on the bottom. So when we talk about a caddis hatch, we're referring to all of this activity up here, because all of that can occur within a couple of days in a short period of time in a small location of a stream. So it's essentially all of this activity excluding eggs on the bottom and the larva. So that's what goes on in the hatch. The other reason why Brachycentrus are important to trout fishing is that this caddisfly is present in all streams during all seasons of the year. And these are excerpts below from the hatch chart I just showed you. So the April hatch, notice the bugs are coming off. The A stands for adult. They're coming off in April, May. The adults mate. Larvae, they lay eggs, and larvae start to hatch in July. So you can start fishing the adult form in April, May, and into July. But here, the larvae are going to be too small to be fished during August through September. But the second hatch then kicks in August and September. So you can continue your fishing of adult forms throughout this time period. They lay their eggs and they mature and become larger larvae through the winter. They pupate in July, So when you look at these months of the year, maybe it's just November and October when the larvae are fairly small, that the fishing might not be really good for the brachycentrus in Wisconsin. So you can fish the larva and the adults in almost all months of the year. So that also contributes to why this is an important aquatic bug to Wisconsin. Here's another reason. There are actually 5 different kinds of granum in Wisconsin. There are 2, though, that are mostly important to us, and that's the occidentalis that emerges in April, and then we have americanus that emerges in September. Hilsenhoff was a professor of entomology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In 1985, he published a paper in Great Lakes Entomologist on the brachycentrus. And what he did was show the distribution of the April hatching brachycentrus or granum in Wisconsin. The size of these circles represents how large the populations of that particular species are within that county. And you can see that the September hatch is less widely distributed within the state. But the other really, really neat thing is to look at the distribution of trout streams in Wisconsin and look at the similarity between granum distribution, in particular the April hatch. Look how they're distributed across the state. Almost exactly the same way trout streams are distributed. This is what really caused me to get very interested in brachycentrus caddisflies, because you find them all over in trout streams. So there had to be a unique relationship between how the evolution of these caddisflies occurred along with the evolution of trout in the state. So when we learn about the granum, or the black caddis, if you will, in Wisconsin, that information is transferable to other parts of the U.S. And that's because the Wisconsin granum are widely distributed across the U.S. So the April hatching brachycentrus, which is called occidentalis, the species name, they're found in the western rivers from New Mexico all the way up through the Rockies, past Wyoming and Montana to British Columbia. So when you fish their black caddis, you're fishing the same species that is common and you're familiar with in Wisconsin. The September hatch in Wisconsin also are common in the western rivers, but in addition to that, they have an eastern distribution in North America and are found from Connecticut north to New Brunswick. The other watch out in the eastern U.S., we only have 5 granum in Wisconsin. Out east, there's probably 8 to 10 different additional kinds of granum or brachycentrus in the east. And now you see this picture here is a demonstration of several things. It's probably some guy who doesn't know how to use a mirror when he puts sunscreen on, or the fact that the bighorn caddisflies don't care what they land on. You notice how darkly colored they are, and I think that's a contributing factor to why in the western states the term black caddis is used for brachycentrus. So main point is, if you want to find them in Wisconsin, where do you look? And the other thing that I really encourage people to do is make field notes. I have about 13, I think I'm on my 14th notebook. And every time I'm on a stream, no matter if it's a fish it or just to walk it, I always make notes. I always make field notes. And I use that information to guide me on all kinds of things. But in the US, if you're looking for granum, you find them in small streams like Big Spring Branch or like the Rush, and here's the bighorn. You find them all over the place. And this is what they look like. This is a close-up of the cases. This is the same species, but notice they built their cases out of different materials. The cases are pretty much the same structure, the larva has selected bits of bark that are rectangular in shape, and the main building material for the case is silk. The silk is extruded from salivary glands in the mouth, just like when spiders build their eggs or their cocoons. It's all based on silk. And this particular caddis here, on the base of it, it's more bark material, but it's just silk up on the top. And this caddis used integrated sand grains into the case construction, just like these have over here. There's more sand grains included, and it just depends on what's available to the caddis fly when they go off to their version of Home Depot for construction material. They take what's readily available. Now, this picture I just brought up, that's from the Chocolate River up in Jim Jenkins country. And I was hiking up the stream fishing and looked on the stream bottom, and I noticed all these little dark marks. Those are brachycentrus, or if you will, black caddis larvae. And you can see my outline here, my reflection as I bent over to take the picture. But these are kinds of things you need to be watching for on a stream. And this is from the flume here in central Wisconsin, and you see how they've anchored themselves to this rock. And you can see their little legs sticking up, filtering the water. But the other thing over here is that I want to point out, they've attached themselves to pebbles in the sand. They do not colonize shifting sand in the central Wisconsin streams, or for that matter, anywhere, because the shifting sand is too mobile. It moves, and it doesn't provide a stable substrate to attach to. So these are the kinds of things you want to look for when you're out fishing on a stream. There may not be a hatch coming off, but if you make some mental notes or write them in your notebook, you can keep track of what stream has good populations of Granum in them. And this is the Rush River. I pulled up a rock, and on the side of the rock, you can see how densely colonized it is with brachycentrus cases. This is the Pine River, the same thing. I pulled up a branch and just look at, they're all attached. And notice they build their materials that are different materials that are common. Look at all the sand grains around. So it's just natural they would incorporate sand grains into their construction materials. So those are some of the things to watch out for, just to learn where in the state, what rivers, where in the rivers to find them. So now we're going to get into the real meat of this presentation. So we're going to talk about the life cycles, and I'm going to start with the larva stage, go to the emerging stage, the adult stage, and the egg laying stage. But when you're on a stream, all of those stages can be present at the same time, not necessarily in the same place. You could have emergence going on upstream. You could have egg laying down around the next bend on the stream, or it could be vice versa. But within each of these life cycle stages, there's behaviors that are going on. And that's the key to understanding what's going on in the life of a granum, and how the trout are going to interact with this caddisfly. So we'll look at the feeding behavior of larvae. We'll look at how the larvae move around in a stream. We'll look at the emerging behavior of the pupa or the ferret adult, mating, egg laying, and then see, it's up to you as an observer in this presentation. You're to take these observations and figure out how to fit them into your life as a fisher. You've got to take the information and adapt it to your style of fly fishing. And I'm going to present a couple of flies here and there. Now, what I mean by beauty of connectedness, what I'm getting at here is, you remember a few slides ago, I showed you the relationship between the distribution of caddisflies in streams in Wisconsin, and how it was similar to the distribution of trout streams. What I find so important in that comparison is how connected trout are to Granum caddisflies. And Granum caddisflies have evolved for hundreds of thousands of years, and so have trout. The Granum and brook trout have been co-evolving in these streams in North America for hundreds of thousands of years. But now we may realize that, well, brook trout are native to North America, but the brown trout isn't. So what's with the brown trout? The neat thing is, Granum are also present in Europe. There are at least 2 or 3 species of Granum in Europe. So when the brown trout evolved in Europe over the eons, they evolved with Granum, the same genus, the same kind of bug over there that we find here, but just a different species. So when European settlement came to North America, they brought the brown trout along. The brown trout came over here, and the brown trout found the Brachycentrus. So it's this connectedness, and we as fishers, and in particular for fly fishing, we try to figure out how to enter a stream and integrate ourselves with what's happening on a stream. We're trying to understand what we're seeing and observing on the stream. We're learning about how the stream interacts with its riparian corridor. So that's all part of the connectedness thing. And we don't have to be fishing to be enjoying how the stream functions together, how energy is transferred from phytoplankton and diatoms, which are eaten by the Brachycentrus larvae, which are then eaten by the trout, which are then eaten by osprey. It's all that interconnectedness that makes our wonderful cold water trout streams important to us. That's part of the theme behind all of this. And certainly the beauty part of it is these are beautiful looking creatures. We're going to be primarily focusing on the larval stage of the life cycle now. And what do larvae do? They spend most of their time feeding. You'll notice that in each one of these slides, I'm going to include a fisher hint. And the hint for the larval stage is fish in flowing water, because these bugs are filter feeders, and you can see how they've attached themselves. These are Brachycentrus. This is the Yellow Dog River from the UP again. And you'll notice that the current flows from left to right. They have their legs extended out into the current. This is a close-up view of one of the less common Brachycentrus for Wisconsin. This is a picture I took from the Little Wolf River in 2012. But on the inside surface of these legs, they have these comb-like structures and bigger spines over here. This picture diagram is from Flint. He was an entomologist, and in 1984, he published a seminal paper on the Brachycentrus of North America. And that's where I took a picture of his drawing to make it more easily visible, the comb-like structures here and the bristles. So these are the structures that the Brachycentrus use to capture bits of algae and organic material flowing down the stream. Now let's see what filter feeding looks like. Dean Hansen gave me permission to use a video that I shot of his aquarium. He usually sets up just a wonderful aquatic bug display at the Great Waters Expo over in the Twin Cities. And Dean Hansen collects bugs and has them as live specimens. And these are Brachycentrus, aka black caddis larvae, that anchor themselves to the edge of this rock. And you'll see the current is pretty aggressive. And you'll notice how they hold their legs out into the moving water to strain their food from it. And look how tenaciously they're holding on. Again, that's why you fish them in fast flowing water. That's where they're going to be. That's where you're going to find the trout. This is still larva activities. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about how larvae move around in a stream. You noticed in the last video how they held their position in the fast current. They do this by attaching a silk anchor from the bottom of the lower lip of the larval case. They attach it to a stable substrate like a branch or a piece of grass or a pebble in the stream. And that's how they attach themselves, because they put all of their legs up into the current to filter feed. So that's how they maintain their position. Again, they're using silk, like the spiders from their salivary glands in their mouth. The interesting thing that goes on here is that bugs drift downstream, and the Grannom do it in a very unique way. They drift downstream by rappelling on a thread of silk. They do this to find new areas to feed, to attach themselves on another rock or someplace that's in a better position to filter feed from, or they can escape danger at that particular location. And I was very fortunate to capture this in a picture. I didn't see it in the field. I didn't see this in the picture until I put it on my laptop. But here you see this Grannom has attached a thread of silk right here to this substrate. It's attached to its mouth, and it's going to repel downstream. This is from the west branch of the white. I picked up this branch from the stream, and you'll notice here are the cases of Grannom suspended by threads of silk, and they're going downstream tail first. Now this unfortunate guy here, he got tangled up in his thread, so he's going to have difficulty repelling because he's all messed up. Let's take a look and see what this actually looks like. And you see, when they repel and they go downstream, they do it tail end first. And this behavior was first described in the sporting literature by Gary Borger and also by LaFontaine. And LaFontaine's book called Caddis Flies. If anybody's interested in really learning about caddis flies, LaFontaine's book is fantastic. He's passed away now, and his book is out of print, but you can buy copies, and the cost of them has really gone up in recent years because they're in limited supply. But this gives you an idea of how fishable these can be in a stream. And now I'm going to show you some video I shot on the Pine River to give you an idea of what it looks like when there's a repelling caddisfly going downstream. In this case, this isn't Grannom. This is not Brachycentrus. It's actually Lepidostoma, which is another small caddisfly that builds a case very similar to Grannom. This guy is attached to a thread. The thread is anchored way up here someplace off screen. You'll see it zip back and forth. You see it right there? That's what it's going to look like to a trout. And if you're going to fish a larva, keep this in mind. How would you use this observation? How do you use that to influence your style of fishing? So that's the challenge that we have here. Okay, so we've seen how the larvae move around. And this is a Peking caddis. And there are many recipes for this out on the net. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but this is a reminder of what we want the caddis flies to look like. I tried to mimic the color of the case. Notice the chartreuse green kind of going back to the Grannom term to match the chartreuse of the larva. Dark colored, these are starling feathers, and a black tungsten bead. And the way that I would fish this, I would fish this off of an anchor fly. And I would attach a tippet to the eye here to the bend of an anchor fly so that this fly would be positioned tail downstream and it would swing back and forth downstream of the anchor fly. That's my hint for how you would learn to fish it when the larvae are repelling downstream. Now, sometimes the larva is going to break free of the thread and it's just going to tumble and twist and roll downstream. So it won't make that much difference if you tie it with the head back here and a tail up here. This is a size 16. This would be, in my opinion, the size of the female larva. Now I'm going to talk about Granum Emergence, and this is going to be a little bit more complex. To point out right from the beginning, fishing the emerging pupa is the best opportunity that you're going to have to fish the Granum hatch. And again, we have 2 hatch periods, April, September. These are the conditions under which I experienced the following pictures and video in April. Usually, I observed the emergence of the swim-up ferrate adult, or the pupa, from noon to 4 in the afternoon. And for the time I was on the stream, the water temperatures were 45 to 55, air temperatures were a wider range, 40 to 65. And the Granum, to watch them come off the stream, it's almost impossible to see them. And you'll see that in the video. So that the big hint is watch the trout. They will tell you something is going on. And what you look for is a rapid, concentrated series of trout rises. If you see a lot of trout rising activity, pay attention to what's going on. And you'll notice that the rises are at the surface. They're very flashy and fast. You'll also see some subsurface feeding activity. Most of the emergence of the pupa are going to be in the thalweg or the main flow of the stream. And what's going on here is that the pupa or ferrate adult is swimming from the bottom. They've escaped from the larval case. They swim up to the top and they've got to fight through the surface tension and quickly emerge as an adult. And again, this is the best fishing opportunity that you're going to have. And this is a reminder of what the bug is going to look like through this series of events. This is what the pupa looks like. Notice it's about 9 millimeters in length. You know, that's a good size 16 hook. I realize that if it's a long shank hook, it'll be different. Remember, 9 millimeters. And now this pupa is enveloped in a shuck case. It's difficult to see. You can see some of the structures here. Here are some gills from the pupa. You can see some of the shuck material sticking out here, but it's a translucent envelope that surrounds the pupa. And note these structures here. These are oar-like appendages that the legs of the adult are encased in, and they are fringed to help the ferrate adult efficiently swim to the surface, because the caddisfly knows it's exposed to predation. So as the ferrate adult hits the surface, it quickly emerges from the shuck case. And these are the female and male adults that I captured just as they broke free from the shuck. Their wings aren't even extended yet in the typical adult fashion. This is about a 16 size. This is about an 18. Notice the coloration. The coloration of the larva is still there, and the coloration in the male is less distinct. Take this into consideration when you design your flies. Now I'm going to show you 2 videos, and one video is 57 seconds in length, and 10 trout will be rising during about 1 minute of time. And that's a pretty good rise rate. The second video is 8 trout rising in 40 seconds. The video was shot on 2 separate days, 2 separate reaches of the same stream. So let's take a look at it. And remember, it's going to be difficult to see the bugs. I could, because I've studied this video, I know where the bugs are coming off. Well, let's just take a look at it. One trout rose down here, another one will come up here. Many of the trout will be rising in the thalweg where most of the bugs are. Right here is a bug going down. Here's another one. They're going to be hard to see. There goes one right here. But this is what you're going to see on a stream. You're not going to be able to very readily decide what's coming off the stream. But the trout are telling you, hey, there's something going on. And there goes another caddisfly. So there are many caddisflies. Here goes one here. There are many caddisflies going downstream. There's one just after that trout rose. The bigger trout are rising over here. The smaller ones are on the side. Now let's slow down this video a little bit. What I've done here is to help make this a bit more visible. Just focus inside the circle and follow the end of this arrow, and it will help you identify a bug that's about to be eaten by a trout that rises here. And then there'll be a second one that comes up in this area of the circle. Right there is the fly going by, and this one escapes. But there's another one that comes up right there, and it got nailed by the trout. Now keep watching. There'll be another one that trout that will rise in this section over here. And again, here's a caddisfly right there going downstream. They're going to be hard as heck to identify without spooking the trout on the stream. In a minute, there'll be another caddisfly coming along. Right there it is, right there, right there, right there. There it was eaten. So the main thing is you're going to have to learn from the trout. Now here's the second video. The 8 trout will rise in about 40 seconds. And again, it's going to be hard to see what's going on. But also notice the distance, the length of time the emerged adults on the surface. It's just for a second or two. And these are small trout rising to the emerging trout, to the emerging caddisflies. And certainly there's some subsurface rises and feeding that's going on. There was a good one there. You'll see one come zipping through here. Okay, let's slow it down to make it more visible. Here is another Granum right there at the tip of the arrow. And you'll see it will flutter, it'll hop and skip, trying to get off the water surface several times before it gets eaten by a trout down here. So it's a short distance that they travel, and that's what you've got to take into consideration when you're fishing this. See how it fluttered up? It's trying to take off the surface. And there it is, and then you see the trout dart away. And I'll just run this one more time. You'll see it move along here. You'll see it flap its wings, it leaves the surface, comes back down again. So it's up and down off of the surface. Then the trout hits it right here. So again, you've got to watch the trout. They'll tell you what's going on. And if you're uncertain about what's going on, what I'd like to do is strain the surface of the water downstream from where you've got a bunch of trout rising to see what's going on. And here I've captured a whole mess of shucks. And that's where I get this picture from. I bring the sample home, put it under a microscope, take a look at it, and that's what they look like. So that can help you understand what's going on in when the emergence is underway. So let's go on to how do you translate this into fishing success? And again, these are just some of my ideas about what some of the flies might look like. And I divided it between these two are subsurface flies. This is at the surface or in the surface. So again, coming off, this is the pupa that's coming out from the bottom. And my attempt here was to kind of simulate what that pupa looks like. It's size 16 to correspond to the size of a female, and tried to mimic the chartreuse color, some of the wing material, legs hanging down. This is the female that's broken through the surface, no wings extended yet, but you could fish either of these flies to represent either of these bugs. And in this I've added a tungsten bead so that it rides lower in the water or down. You can fish it down in the bottom. This is the design that I found quite useful at the surface or in the surface. Notice that there's no palmering of the chartreuse material for the shank of the hook. I wanted the fly to ride low in the water. This represents the trailing shuck. And there are many examples of these flies online, this style of fly design. And here's the inflated wing. Now, as far as fishing this particular fly design here, remember we saw the skipping and hopping fashion of the fly as soon as it broke through the surface. One way to mimic that would be to tie a dropper off of the dry fly. And you may even want to put this style of a fly with a bead as the dropper behind the dry fly. This can act as an anchor. So when you just tweak your rod tip a little bit, you can cause this dry fly to momentarily bounce up off the surface of the water. That's pretty easy to talk about, probably pretty difficult to do in practice. Now let's get into the next stage of the life cycle. The caddis flies have emerged. They've gone to the vegetation along the side of the stream. Their next big event is mating. And mating will occur on the streamside vegetation, rocks or logs. The males will be crawling around, mobbing the females. My observation has been this usually occurs in the afternoon between 1 and 5. And the fishing hint is this is not a good fishing opportunity. It will lead to a lot of frustration because all the action is going on off the stream. It's on the stream bank. It's on the vegetation along the stream. Very little of it is happening on the stream. These are largely males running around looking for females. Notice there, I don't see very many black caddis here, black colored. Okay, this is a female that's caught and the male is running off, pulling her behind. Notice how they're attached together, their tips of their abdomen. Okay, here, this is a female being mobbed by a bunch of males. Notice the light tan color of the insect. The abdomens are still green. They maintain that green color throughout their whole life cycle. And occasionally, some of them will fall onto the stream and they'll drift. So maybe occasionally downstream you might have some action, but it is not common. It leads more to fisher frustration than anything else. But take a break, sit on the bank and eat a sandwich. Just watch what's going on, enjoy yourself. The other takeaway here is look at how high the surface tension is holding these caddis flies on the surface. There's no risk for them to sink within the surface. And notice the heads are on opposite ends because the tips of the abdomen are joined in mating. Mayflies can mate in the air over a stream. Caddis flies cannot mate in the air. They mate on the side of the stream, and only after mating has occurred does the female return to the stream to be vulnerable for a trout to feed on. So this is really different than mayflies. Now we're going to talk about egg laying during afternoon flights. I'm sure you all have observed caddis flies flying up and down on the stream. Again, these are the conditions under which I shot the video in April. The flights of flying females up and down the stream is usually between noon and 4 o'clock. Water temperatures 48 to 55. You see the air temperatures there. These flights of females usually occurs on a warm afternoon with a light wind blowing. If it's a stronger wind, the wind will push the caddis flies off the stream, and they'll have to wait for another day to have their swarming activity over the stream. The video is 60 seconds in length. You will see more than 60 granum flying past. 3 or 4 of them will touch the surface of the stream to lay eggs. And this is a pretty good fishing opportunity. So let's take a look at it. This is a slow motion. So you'll see the female caddis swimming up or flying upstream. There's quite a few of them on the wing. You'll see some of them land over here, and just for a few seconds they'll be on the surface and drift down. Notice there are no trout rising, and the sun is directly overhead. I'm close to the stream. Last summer, I saw an awesome experience for the September hatch up on the middle reach of the Ontonagon. Brook trout were leaping out of the stream, all the way out of the stream. 8 to 10 inch brookies would leap out of the stream and capture these caddis on the wing. They take them right out of the air. And that was a fantastic piece of action to see. Unfortunately, I decided to keep fishing. I didn't shoot any video of that. I wish I had probably shot video of the brookies. But let's slow this down and make it a little bit more visible. This is, you'll see the females here. You see them. This is along the edge of the stream. Same stream as we were showing before. You can see them flying around. Notice how they flit around as they kind of hop along. So that's the kind of behavior that would be attracting the trout to rise to them. This is still kind of hard to see, so let's slow it down one more level. And you'll see a female come flying in. Here she is. Look how low her wings are to the water surface. Her feet are barely on the surface. So these bugs should be sitting low on the surface or in the surface to mimic egg laying. So keep that in mind when you fish and when you design your flies. You can see the tip of her abdomen being dragged along the surface of the stream. Okay, we've done the aerial or the surface feeding piece. Now we're going to continue with egg laying, but this is egg laying underwater. And I don't have any video of this happening. So we'll just use a few pictures. But what happens is that the surface tension is very high on the top of the stream. You saw how well those bugs could easily walk on the top of the water. So it's difficult for the insects they almost have to dive with speed to get through the water surface. But mostly what happens is that they will crawl down through the water column, either on an emergent rock or sticks that stick up out of the stream, or they'll crawl down the riverbank and get under the surface that way. And then they swim to the bottom to lay eggs. Again, this is a good fishing opportunity because the bugs are swimming underwater. And again, it's another chance to see what the green tail looks like. So what I've captured here are pictures of egg masses that have been laid by the females underwater. This is from Davies Creek. And for a size reference, this is the larva case. There's a tip of my finger, but this is what the Granum colored egg mass looks like. And this is an enlargement of the same egg mass, or a different one that's nearby it. No, it is the same, because here's a black-flied larva, and here's a black-flied larva here in a different position. So you can see what the coloration is. And again, it's the same theme, the same chartreuse green through all the life stages of the Granum caddisfly. And that's why I guess I like the term Granum, because it references the color. So we've covered quite a few things. Let's talk about the last bit of applying some of this learning to fly design. And the top part, this is a fly that I tied up. I based it on the David McPhail design that you can see online. And notice the green pattern for the egg mass, and the wing pattern that's typical of an elk wing. And here are some CDC material. So this fly can be designed, can be used to mimic the egg-laying female on the surface. So you could do the skip and hop fashion by attaching a bead head to the hook bend, so that you can leverage, you can just pop this up and off the surface. The other thing that you can do, and Gary LaFontaine talks about this a lot in his book on caddis flies, on the tippet, put a micro split shot like they do down here. Put a micro split shot 6 inches or so above the fly. Let that sink down, and then as you tug on it, you can pull this fly subsurface, and that could represent the female that has broken through the surface tension to lay eggs. Now, certainly the females that do get below the surface, a soft hackle is really a great fly design. Al Johnson speaks wonders of the importance of green soft hackle. Al is certainly correct. And here's the green color. This is Pearson silk that I've used to tie this. This is again a starling feather. I think the best use of a starling is to take their feathers and make flies out of them. And this is an ostrich herald. And you could fish this, in surface, down below the surface. You can tie a micro bead onto the tippet head of it and fish under it, or you could drop it from an anchor fly. A lot of ways to fish the wet soft hackle. It's a great fly. And you could fish this also, you could use this as a swim up, when emergence is going on. And don't forget about drowned adults. The females that swim underwater to lay eggs, they're not going to survive. Many of the other adults that are on the surface, they're going to end up submerged as well. No better way to fish them than this fly design, but also this other fly design. Get it wet, pull it underwater. I think those will fish pretty well as well. And this is the trout reward at the end of a good day applying some of the Granum knowledge that has been shared with you tonight. You'll recognize this trout. There's at least a couple of people on this call tonight that know this trout. You've caught this trout before. You'll recognize it as a tiger. This trout has been released. You can see it being released there. It got its teeth caught up a little bit in the net. but it's released. It's been caught by 3 different trout fishermen in our chapter over a period of several years. So if anybody ever doubts the value of catch and release, you just saw one of the benefits of it. And we've run our course. We've gone through life cycles, a lot of behaviors. We've talked about connectedness. And again, just look how beautiful caddis flies are. Let's have some questions or comments. Everybody's welcome to talk. Nate, if there's any specific items in the chat area, let's bring those out.
I had one question, and that is it a fairly large hatch, like an all at once type of hatch instead of like a more of a dispersed hatch?
Do you mean dispersed over days or dispersed over hours?
Well, I guess, you see some hatches that, throughout the day, there's a bug coming off here that they're, where this seems like it's more of like a definite, distinctive, like all or nothing, like they're sitting at the bottom and somebody, gives the whistle and they all come charging up to the top and take flight.
Well, my experience has been that, this can go on for a good half hour, maybe 45 minutes sometime. The emergence piece of it, that's not going to go on forever, but it'll go on for, a good half hour or so. But if that's over, you can go down around the next bend on the stream, and there can be a flight of females coming upstream laying eggs. So this can be all mixed together. Al and I have fished this on the stream, and that's the kind of the experience that we've had. And but also the trout remember what's going on. You can fish that dry elk wing style lowrider that has the shuck behind. You can fish that even when you don't readily see activity, and trout remember it. They'll come up to it.
All right, we just had a question come in asking about your camera. What camera do you use? Excellent exposure, and then asked if there was a micro lens or if you're using auto exposure.
Now this is okay. I'm a real amateur. This is and if you were impressed with the pictures, that means everybody and anybody can do this. I use a couple of cameras. I use the Pentax. Let's see, I have it here in my hand. It's a Pentax WG3 underwater camera, and it's a point and shoot. And I use my iPhone sometimes as well too. Anybody can shoot these videos, or anybody can shoot the pictures. Some of the close-ups of the larva, though, I capture a lot of specimens on the streams, and I bring them home, and I photograph them with these 2 cameras. I photograph them under maybe a little bit more controlled conditions. And there's a macro focus function on this camera, and you can select that, and it seems to work out pretty well. But again, I'm purely I'm more of a fisherman. I'm not a photographer.
Well, there were some really good videos and photos in there, so I'd second that person's statement there.
It was a great presentation, Tom.
No, thank you. It was fun as heck to put it together.
All right, I have another question. So, you have the silk string that hangs out, and the fish or the caddis kind of dangles, and you had mentioned putting like a fly in front of that and tying that. How long of a tippet, and do you use a certain size tippet for that presentation?
I would fish it just like you would fish any dropper off of an anchor fly. It could be 12 to 18 inches. Uh, uh, and it could be 5X or 4X. You know, probably I would most commonly use a 5X tippet for that to anchor the larva to. And again, you could fish it up through the water column. You know, but the watch out is, you know, like you mentioned before, Nate, there's a lot of wood in central Wisconsin streams. And whenever you're fishing something below the surface, you're going to get hung up. But that's the nature of it. But also remember, you can be fishing this in Wyoming and on the Bighorn. The same bugs are out there. They're doing the same stuff. Gary LaFontaine, you know, read his book that is Caddis Flies. And it's an expensive book now because it's not many of them are in print. But in there, he actually came to Wisconsin and did a lot of research for his book in Wisconsin. So it's a good book to invest time in reading in.
Well, this one was more of a statement, but apparently there's a technique that you might be interested in. It's called shadow casting. So when them fish are leaping out of the water, instead of landing that fly on the water, you're just supposed to hover it just above the water before you bring it back. So
I've never tried that, but I would love to have that opportunity. I think who's ever comment that is, it's a good one. I'd love to see that.
Yes, yeah. So you know, somebody just said something about asking about the species of caddis hatch in the Fox River. I know it's a little bit off topic, but still caddis.
Well, there's quite a number of different species in the Fox River. They mainly belong to the family Hydropsychidae, but there are several different genus. They're primarily sand or primarily tan sedges is the common name for them. But the genus Hydropsyche, Comatosyche, Actopsyche, there's a whole bunch of them. And then you add maybe 5 different species to each one of those names. There's a lot of them.
Yeah. And I think we mentioned that at the last chapter meeting, and they were talking about fishing, not, obviously for the fox, you're not fishing trout there, but carp, fishing for carp on that hatch.
Yeah. Well,
that would be.
Smallmouth bass would be another one. Smallmouth bass will come up and feed on that caddis hatch as well. I've seen this swirls of caddis, dead caddis on the surface, and bass will come in there and munch on them. And I think the same thing could be said for carp.
Yeah.
I mean,
the Orioles like them too.
There you go.
Be careful not to catch a bird on your way through. Mm-hmm. All right, we got another question from Jimmy. Said fishing, and he was asking about the advantages of having your dry fly patterns with the hook on the top out of the water. If there's any advantages to that style of dry fly.
Hook out of the water?
Yeah, so I think he's asking, instead of normally the dry fly has got the hook tailing downward in the water, that is having the hook so that when it rests in the water, the hook is actually pointing up.
That's an interesting question. I have no idea. I've never fished that way. There's probably some other more experienced fishers online here that have something they might contribute to that.
I've seen it more for the like the mayflies. I've seen some mayfly patterns that were that way. I don't know if I've ever seen a caddis like that.
But these caddis are pretty small. We're talking about 18s and 20s, hook sizes. The October caddis, that's 3 times the size of these. And then the caddis you're talking about on the Fox River, they're about 2 times the size of these Grannom or the black caddis, if you will. else. You just sit on the riverbank and watch what's going on and enjoy it. There's always
Well-
bugs underwater to pick up a rock or a branch and look at them, they're always there for you.
Yeah, for sure. And that whole diving aspect of it, really when I first started out and I didn't know much about the different styles of flies and things like that, I used an L-Care caddis, and I noticed that when I would let it drift down, and then when I would it would get some tension in it, it would dive under the water, and I would pull that back, and I recall catching a lot of fish on the caddis that way, just as much as I would landing it on the top of the water. So that's
right. And that one fly design that I showed you that could be fished underwater as well, that's by David McPhail out of Scotland, and the Gary LaFontaine has I forget the name of his fly. It's very similar to that, but they're designed to capture an air bubble inside that CDC material, and it pulls underwater, and that helps attract fish. But the same thing that it does, though, that could be fished also as you may want to clip off the antenna, or you could fish that as an emerging ferried adult or pupa coming up. The other thought I had too is that we showed a whole bunch of different styles of flies. You don't need to have every one of those styles to fish. You probably want to have one that fishes the emergent, the swim up, and then the one that could be on the surface, and then also have a soft hackle you can fish underwater. But just don't forget about Al's green soft hackle.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good fly.
Now, the other thing I wanted to mention, Jim Jenkins was sharing with me the other day that when he has looked at the stomach contents of steelhead up north, and I've seen the same comments from Russ Mueller, that the trout and the steelhead eat the whole bug, case and all. So when you fish the case, the larval pattern, have the case on it, because the trout eat the whole thing.
Tom, what size that soft hackle? What size hook is that?
I would fish it. I mean, I think that was a 16 probably.
16, okay.
But 18s through 14s would work really well.
Yeah,
but John, it depends on the style of hook too. If it's for a lot of my soft hackles, I use a 2488, which is a 2x short hook. So that's probably going to be almost in a 14 or a 12, just because it's a short hank hook. So the size of the hook is kind of difficult to use, and that's why I use that millimeter length of the pupa as a guide.
if
Al,
I could,
go ahead, Al.
if I could jump on Tom's response there, I most often fish a size 14 green soft hackle, but I'm very careful to make sure my body length isn't too long, because I really like to fish it more as a 16, but the size 14 seems to have a bigger hook gap, and I think I get more hookups as a result of that.
So what length are you shooting for with the body on that?
Well, I don't go all the way back to the hook bend. I will go about 2/3 of the way back. Tom's illustration of that fly was pretty accurate. It's very easy to, when you tie that fly, to want to just take that green Pearsall's thread and just go way back to the deep into the hook bend and then bring it back forward. You don't need to do that. You just need to have that good hint of green color going on and keep that size proportion.
As far as weight goes, do you try to use a higher gauged hook to get more weight, or do you use you know,
Well,
oh,
if I'm going to use, like we said before, these Grannom for Wisconsin, they're also found out west of the Bighorn. So I use a 2488H, which is a heavy wire scud hook for the soft hackles on the Bighorn, because the fish are larger there. But you don't need to do that for the Wisconsin trout that I usually catch. Steve Hauser probably needs to use a heavy one because he can catch the big browns that I can't. But I think just no. If I want to weight anything to get it down deeper, I'll use it as I'll use an anchor fly, and then I'll put the soft hackle probably behind it.
I'll jump in there again. I fished for many, many years with the green soft hackle, throwing them downstream, down and across, Lysing relief. And then you mentioned LaFontaine, Tom. I read some information from Hughes, Dave Hughes. And he talked about tossing the green soft hackle or the soft hackle upstream and letting it dead drift down. And you don't use an indicator or anything. You just watch the tip of your fly line. If you see a pause in your fly line, set the hook. And specifically up in the UP, on a couple of the streams up there, that technique is deadly up there. The brook trout will climb all over that.
Yeah.
wow, that's interesting because, when I think of doing that with like the soft tackle or the emerger, you think you want to do like the swing where you drift it down, and then where the fish look like they're actively feeding, that's where you want the tension to start, so that fly then rises up to the top, to mimic that whole rising. What is it? A ferrate? Is that what it's called, Tom?
Just call it a pupa. We'll keep things simple.